Okay, so hello everyone. My name's Chandra Easton. I'm an esoteric astrologer. It's I think it's the 4th of September, and I'm talking about the eclipses tonight. The total lunar eclipse and the solar eclipse that's occurring in September. Yeah, so that's the focus for the evening. But I'm also going to be talking a little bit about the United Nations, the General Assembly. They're having their 80th meeting. In September, I think, goes for about 10 days, I think. Then I'll talk a little bit about the great year that's ending, the zodiacal year that's ending, and something to do with what I refer to as the new revelation, with some teachings from the Lady Ananda Tarashan. Okay, so it is a total lunar eclipse, and you generally have anywhere between 2 and 4 eclipses in a year, but they're not all total eclipses. And the total eclipses are, well, it's like a bullseye as opposed to a near miss, so to speak. So they're much more important, and depends where you are on the planet as to whether you experience it on the 7th of September, that's Sunday, or if you're in Australia or New Zealand, then it'll be very early on the 8th of September on Monday. Now, the total lunar eclipses are also referred to as the blood moon. And apparently, what happens is that the moon, the hidden light of the sun, is refracting around the edge of the moon. And I've heard the NASA scientists say that this is the equivalent of seeing every sunrise and every sunset on Earth simultaneously. Now, of course, esoterically, the moon and the sun represent personality, that's the moon, and the sun, the soul. So we have the sort of the energy of the sun, the soul, trying to permeate and refract around the personality, to infuse it, really. And so we have an astronomical event in the sky, in the heavens, but it's deeply esoteric. And of course, here in 2025, where we seem to have wars everywhere on the planet, and not the least of which is in the Ukraine or in the Middle East, there's a lot of blood being spilled. And the blood moon is called a blood moon because the colour is ruby red. And that image there of the blood dripping down into the oceans, I think, is quite emblematic of what's happening on Earth. The personalities of some nations, some leaders have run amok, and literally we have the blood of humanity pouring into the astral body, the oceans. Now, it was back in 2015 and 2015 that we had a fairly spectacular series of blood moons, lunar eclipses, total lunar eclipses.
Well, now they're reviewing the numbers at Charlotte Street. And
thank you very much. So back in 2014, 2015, there were 4 total lunar eclipses in a row, and that's referred to as a tetrad. And I did a talk on that about a decade ago because there was a lot of interest and hype happened around these 4 eclipses, and there's a lot of talk about how they herald the end of the age of Pisces and the entry into the age of Aquarius. So that, and it's been a decade since we had that 4 in a row, the tetrad. Now, a tetrad, or the 4, which is the square, is a symbol for the personality. Whereas what we have now, and you can see here the dates, the bottom of the screen here, in 2025 and 2026, is a triad, gone too far, a triad, 3 blood moons over that period. 14th of March, that was earlier in 2025. This one that's Sunday night or Monday morning on the 7th of September, and one next year, 3rd of March. Now, the triad, the triangle, is a symbol for the soul. So there's something about these 2 groups, the 4 blood moons in a row, representing the personality a decade ago, and the 3 blood moons in a row, representing the soul, that seems to be this attempt for the soul's light to permeate and overtake and overshadow the personalities individually and nationally. Okay, this particular image here is just an image of where you can see, excuse me, the eclipse according to where you are on the planet. So if you look at the one in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see the time frame for, if you're in New Zealand, it's 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning on the 8th, that's Monday. But if you're over here in Western Australia, it's much earlier in the morning. So here we are in Victoria, 3:30 to, what's that, 8 minutes to 5. So the time frame for the lunar eclipse sits there for an extended period. Yes, there's another map. That's what we call the path of Umbra, and it just shows you the little star in the middle here shows you exactly where the eclipse is occur. That's what they refer to as totality, and these are the places where it's the pale grey where the eclipse is visible. That's Africa, Indonesia, of course, parts of Australia, but primarily it's in the Indian Ocean. Yeah, so anywhere in the Americas they wouldn't see it. Up here in Scandinavia they wouldn't see it. You'd have to be in India, Indonesia, probably the western half of Australia, or what's this, Mozambique, in order to get a visual of it. You'd have to be up at the right time. Okay, so what is the chart? Now, I've cast this chart for the exact position. You'll see up there in the top corner, I've cast it for 10 minutes past midnight on the 8th, and I've cast it from the exact position in the North Indian Ocean. So let me point out the eclipse to you. The eclipse is where the sun, that's the circle with the dot in the middle of it, sits at 1522 Virgo, directly opposite the moon, 1523. Looks like I'm a minute out for some reason. Yes, but that's the eclipse where the moon and the sun are exactly opposite. Now, esoterically, this is interesting because the sun has fallen in the middle, what we call the cross quarters of Virgo, in the 16th degree of Virgo, and the middle of the mutable signs is a sort of a wake-up call for ordinary humanity. So it's like someone being shaken, violently awake out of a nightmare. And we see the nightmare happening all around the planet and humanity being shaken to wake us up. And that's the purpose of this eclipse, to wake us up, to wake up the ordinary person, the common person, the person who hasn't necessarily thought very deeply about all kinds of things. Okay, the other thing that's noticeable is that the nodal axis, that's the south node there, is right on the midheaven, and the north node is right on the IC. And so the IC, the bottom of the chart here, is a spiritual direction. So this tells us that the spiritual purpose of this eclipse is to take us deep into the heart of the mystical and beyond the emotional and beyond the sleepwalking that humanity has been doing. So it's sort of like a wake-up call for consciousness, and it's very visible on a worldly level, on a political level. The issues of humanity sleepwalking to disaster and needing to be woken up and to take some kind of action. So they're the things I get from the South Node and the position of the eclipse there. Other things to notice is the planet Saturn. Here it is down the bottom. Now Saturn's sitting in the very last degree of the zodiac. So that's another symbol, if you like, for the end of an epoch, the end of an era. Some people might say, well, it's the end of a 29.5-year cycle. Or you could say it's the end of the Piscean age, but it's the end of hopefully one level of sleepwalking consciousness on Earth. And the red lines, you see the square that goes from Saturn up to the ascendant, and the square that goes over here. So what we have is a mutable grand cross. A mutable grand cross is a bit like if you take a child in the game of blindman's bluff and you spin them around until they lose all sense of orientation, and then they have to find the people they're playing the game with. Well, you can't use your outer senses. You need to find an inner point of stillness and then find the heart and go on the inner senses, because otherwise we're blinded. So this is a statement about humanity being blinded at the end of an era or an epoch, and particularly ordinary humanity who are sleepwalking towards disaster, and a need to kind of tune in, wake up, find focus, rather than just stumble around blindly. Other things to notice about this chart is the 27th degree of Sagittarius, which is also known as the galactic center. And just as the heart chakra in a human is the esoteric center for love, so the galactic center in our solar system is an entry point for greater love. So clearly what we're missing individually and collectively is a connection to greater love. Other things to notice about the chart is Mars is in Libra. Well, Mars doesn't function very well in Libra. It's a bit like a person who's got a sports car, but they prefer to travel along in second gear or third gear. And they've failed to change frequencies, change consciousness, move to the next level. And they're kind of stuck in a very slow cruise pattern, a comfortable pattern. Yeah, so that's the message that I get from the Mars sitting in Libra. And with its square to Jupiter means that the reason we're comfortable is that somewhere we've identified our family or our safe places as too small or too narrow. One of the dangers of the sign of Cancer is to become quite nationalistic. And so being extremely comfortable in one's own skin color or one's own culture or one's own wealth means that we're unable to see what it's like to walk in another person's shoes. So that Mars-Jupiter square is problematic at the moment because, you know, the chart is asking us to wake up and take action and stop sleepwalking, but there's a level of comfort and cruising at a lower consciousness that is habitual. Yes. Other things to talk about. Having said that, there are some aspects of humanity that are networking and operating very well in terms of having changed gear to a higher frequency, and that's the trines from the North Node and the Moon in Pisces up to Jupiter. And there's a very strong, I would imagine, a large component, maybe an invisible component of humanity who are working with the Holy Mothers of the Earth to bring comfort, to bring succour, to act with generosity and inclusion. The sextile that goes up here to Vulcan means that one of the ways to change gear is to look at one's daily life and one's health and one's livelihood and one's food and make sure that it's holistic and wholesome. Yeah, and to be able to share it, that's the sextiles. The planet Mars is sitting conjunct the fixed star Spica, which is known to bring forward brilliance and new knowledge. Yeah, and the Sabian symbol for this 21st degree of Libra is information in the symbol of an autumn leaf. Yes, and so it's kind of like the microcosm of the way forward for all of us is held in nature. It's held in the simple things, and it's symbolic. So, you know, you might say food is symbolic. Bread, a loaf of bread is symbolic. All of those things. Okay, let me just continue on. I think that's all I wanted to say there. Now, what happens is that the lunar eclipse is on the full moon next Sunday, Monday, and then a fortnight after that, on the 22nd of September, we have a partial solar eclipse. So let's talk about that. Now, if you're in certain places on the planet, you'd consider the solar eclipse to be on the 21st, whereas taken from the actual position of the eclipse, which is sort of down here, it is there. You see the little red star just south of New Zealand. It's actually the 22nd. So this has got the 21st that comes from NASA, but it's the 22nd here in this part of the world. And the area of influence of the solar eclipse, this partial solar eclipse, is where you can see the red line there. So it's very much putting the Ring of Fire and New Zealand and Antarctica and right down the tip of South America in the frame. And that's important because it has a geophysical and a tectonic influence as well as other things. I've just referred to it as the Antarctic partial solar eclipse, and you'll see the eclipse. Let me find my little pointer again. There it is. There's the eclipse there, and it's in the 29th degree of Virgo. Okay, so we've got the sign of Virgo being mentioned twice. First of all, in the lunar eclipse, to do with ordinary humanity to wake up and stop sleepwalking. And then the 29th degree of Virgo, which is, well, a way to describe, well, the Sabian symbol for it's actually referred to as the 30th degree, the next whole degree, for that eclipse is having an urgent task to complete. A man doesn't look to any distractions. Now, that's a very strong clue that says there's an urgent task for humanity and we mustn't let ourselves be distracted. But of course, we know that the world is full of a million distractions, whether that's online, whether it's shopping, gambling, whatever. And ordinary humanity are very prone to getting distracted or getting lost or getting confused or walking around with blindfolds. But the task is to focus without distraction. And the sign of Virgo is about shielding the growing light of the soul. You see, the energy of the soul is birthed through the sign of Leo, and you might then think of it as a light that's getting stronger through the sign of Virgo. So there's a very strong message there for those people who are in touch with their own soul light to shield that light and protect it and make sure it doesn't go out. How that light comes into being, it could be through music, it could be through art, could be through one's spiritual practices, it could be through looking after the environment, gardening, nurturing the family, a million ways that the light can come into being, but we need to nurture it, otherwise it will go out. Okay, the other thing that's interesting to note in this chart, and again we have a big red square, okay, but a different red square. So the big grand cross in the lunar eclipse is a wake-up call for ordinary humanity. Yeah, the big red square here in the solar eclipse is an activation call for the disciples of Earth. For those who are already actively involved, whoever came in last, can they make sure that they're muted, please?
Thank you.
Yes, otherwise it causes a problem for me. Yes, so and this is Mars up on the midheaven, Pluto on a Capricorn ascendant, Chiron down the bottom of the chart, and the descendant. No, still not muted. So when we have Pluto sitting on the ascendant, we have to let go and accept the cycle that we're in. Look, that could be all kinds of things. It could be a health crisis that means that you've individually moved into a new cycle. It could be a wealth crisis. It could be, and I know it's a crisis because we've got Chiron, a planetoid to do with crisis, at the bottom of the chart. So whatever the crisis is, whether it's physical, relationship, health, worldly, spiritual, family, we have to accept that we can't go back to how life used to be. And humanity, you know, we're habitual people. We want to go back. We like to go back and do things the old way. But this sort of says, let go and accept that the times have changed. Get with the new phase of what's happening in your life, whatever it is. And then up here we have Mars in Libra, same as it was in the lunar eclipse chart, and still operating on a lower gear. Not hasn't moved to third gear or fourth gear or top gear. So this is an indication that for any of the world's spiritual disciples who are operating at a low pace, putting in the minimum effort rather than the maximum effort, it sort of says, get it together. Yeah, don't be lazy. Don't take your foot off the pedal, don't slow down for whatever reason. Now's the time for action. Yeah, so fairly dramatic. And then the square over here to the descendant is just a reminder to all of us that we are all a mixture of personality and soul, and that any one of us can be tripped up or slowed down, or we can be subject to self-sabotage, whatever it is. This is the position for the ego of the dweller sitting there. Yeah, so it's a fairly strong call to keep on with the work in the world, whatever it takes, and to go to the highest level of our capacity. Okay, Mars here is in the 30th degree of Libra, and the Sabian symbol for that is 3 mounds of knowledge on a philosopher's head. So clearly, if we have a philosophy or an ideology or a theosophy or a spiritual framework that we live our life by, we have to walk that talk. If we don't have that, then we better find a teacher or a teaching. We better find the 3 mounds of knowledge, because we need to think bigger and larger rather than small and narrow and giving of the minimum. Okay, there are a couple of kites in the chart. Let me see if I can see them. Now, the kite, you see the big blue triangle? That's an air. Well, air and earth grand triangle. Well, there's 2 of them. This one here is an air. It goes from Pluto to Uranus and up to Mercury. That is a fantastic esoterically inclined air grand trine. That means that we have access to all kinds of insight or wisdom or teachers or teachings. Basically, we have no excuse for not knowing what's going on if we care to look. And then that particular kite goes down to the Saturn, which sort of indicates to us that we need to find, Saturn in Pisces has very strong first ray energy and third ray energy. And so we have to find a depth of conviction and principle and live according to that, and begin to share that and network that through the air grand trine. You could do that in your choir. You can do that in your family group. You can do it with the neighbours. Share ideas, share videos that you find online. Spread the word of wisdom wherever and however you can. That's one of the kites. That's the other kite, Chandra. The other kite is, well, it's the Capricorn ascendant. Yes, going to the sun in Virgo and down here to Uranus. And so we have sort of an air kite and an earth kite. So the air kite is associated with networking and collaboration and the online world and interpersonal interchange, whereas the earth kite is to do with living within one's means and being very mindful of how and in what way you use your resources, and dare I say it, being wary or cautious about any upheavals that may well come in the financial sector. I should have said that a lunar eclipse is operational for a few weeks, whereas a solar eclipse, this one here, is operational for up to 3 years. Yeah. So what we've got here is a message for the next 3 years. Yeah. So there may well be some upheavals and upsets or complete collapse of structures, whether that's governments, whether that's banks, both of those over the next 3 years. I'm sorry that whoever it is has still not muted themselves. I'll mute you. Sorry. There we go. Okay. All right. Let's look at Neptune. Neptune's sitting down here, very strongly connected to Saturn and the Earth. And the Sabian symbol for that is a woman has risen out of the ocean and a seal is embracing her. Now, Neptune's moved into Aries earlier in 2025, and it heralds a new spiritual horizon. So I'm inclined to think that the woman is humanity And the ocean is our emotional nature. And the seal, well, I mean, that reminds me of the Selkie from the Celtic traditions. And I think maybe you could say, well, that's your familiar, that's your soul, that's an otherworldly creature. Yeah. But there's this sort of embrace of something beyond the physical and beyond the emotional. Yes, it's very interesting. On the one hand, it's a beautiful solar eclipse pattern because it's extremely hopeful for the networking, as long as we realise that the old era is finished and there will be collapses that happen and possibly banking, and that we need to live sustainably. And it's also because this eclipse, a whole lot of the planets fall up here in the 9th house, there's a great amount happening on the international political stage that is impacting life on Earth for everybody. So in some regard, we're observing events that we don't have control of, and yet we have a deep amount of control if we move to the spiritual level. I did notice that the planet Uranus, which is in the 1st degree of Gemini, very strongly impacts the Indian chart for when India became a nation in whatever it was, 1948 maybe. Yes, I was looking at that, and so I thought, well, and I noticed that at the same time during the last week when I realised that India, that has been traditionally a very strong ally of America, has shifted allegiance to the BRICS countries of China and Russia and the like, and this has caused momentous upheaval across the international political scene in the last few days. And I put that down to the energy of Uranus. Now, even though the eclipse doesn't occur until the 21st, 22nd, we are in the eclipse window. And the window of the area, the period of influence for an eclipse is actually 6 weeks. 3 weeks before the eclipse, which is right now, and 3 weeks after the 22nd of September. So, and everything that occurs in this next 6-week period is a microcosm for the important things of the next 3 years. So what's happening in, the Middle East is a microcosm of what might happen over the next 3 years, what's happening on a political level, economically, what's happening with the rise of BRICS. All of those things are heralded for further unfoldment over the next 3 years. Yes, very, very interesting chart, because anyone who had Pluto on the ascendant in their own solar return chart, I would say to them, well, you're in a completely new era and there's no point trying to hold on to how life used to be. Just get a grip and have a look and let go and pay attention to see what the new reality is. These two images you no doubt would have seen either on your television or on the screen somewhere, the Shanghai meeting. That's just literally the last couple of days where all the nations have been meeting, what they call it, the SCO meeting. None of the American or the Western European leaders were there, but a very, very strong show of force from world leaders meeting in Shanghai there. And this other one here that is from after the meeting between President Trump and Putin in Alaska. This is the European heads of states. And the optics, the visuals for this are very striking. If you needed any other reminder that the old era is finished and the new era has begun, that photo kind of says it all. We are in a completely different realm, and we are transitioning to new global governance over the next 3 years, according to that solar eclipse chart. The USA, through Donald Trump, attempted to weaponize global trade, tariffs here and penalizing there and everywhere, and it's backfired. It's simply not working, and there's a great amount of collaboration and cooperation through the BRICS nations. And this is, I don't know how many members, I can't remember, but China, Russia, India. And I mean, the most dramatic thing that's happened just in this last week is that the Indians have said, okay, well, we're going to supply I beg your pardon, the Russians are going to bring pipeline from Russia across to China, which will provide oil for India. So India is basically shifting where and how and who it trades with. And I do find it interesting because of the strong Uranus on the Indian national chart that indicates that India's pivot from the west, if you like, to the east is emblematic of where the world's going over the next 3 years. And it really is a reversal of what has been the status quo. It remains to be seen, of course, whether we have whether the economies of Russia or China or India are more egalitarian, whether they continue to work with the socialists caring for the people, because clearly, so it appears to me, that the economies of the Western world have been feeding the wealthy and feeding the rich, and the wealthy get wealthier and the poorer get poorer. And so we need to break that pattern. Whether this can occur through the transition that's clearly happening on a global trade level now and over the next 3 years, well, we have to watch this space. But we're going from basically the unipolar world, where America calls the shots and Britain and NATO are right behind it, to what we refer to as the multipolar world. Or you could say, according to the Lord DK, we're going into the Eurasian century. This has been predicted that China will come to the foreground in the 21st century, just as America was in the foreground in the 20th century, and Britain was in the foreground and leading the world in the 19th century. So the era of America running the show, it's over. It's completely over. And what we're seeing is the breakup of that control. Yes, there's fairly momentous things that are occurring on the world stage, which will just become the complete and utter norm over the next 3 years. Now, I just wanted to harken back to this chart here. What I've got here, and I wanted to compare it, is to, this one down the bottom left is the total solar eclipse that occurred in 2015. And it occurred, so that's 10 years ago, it occurred in the 29th degree of Pisces. Yeah. And now the Antarctic solar eclipse that is occurring on the 22nd of September, 21st and 22nd of September, is occurring in the 29th degree of Virgo. So to an astrologist, this is extremely interesting. This is like a matching pair of bookends. Yeah. There's something that's been set up a decade ago that is coming into its next step or its next stage now. And the number 29 is a crisis number. So the crisis of the total solar eclipse, and immediately when I realised that the 29 was there in both eclipse charts, I realised, well, this is when the Ukraine issue erupted and has never really gone away. And I'm not sure what was happening in the Middle East around 2015, but I know, well, I think that Syria was falling apart and Israel was flexing its muscles then also. So the wars that are happening now have their roots at least a decade back and clearly much, much further. But the energy of crisis that was there from 2015, 2016, 2017 continues with its next stage here, 2025, 2026, 2027. Yeah, and astrologically, whenever we see something in the 29th degree, we know that a transition is coming, and transition can be made difficult or easy depending upon how we use our free will. Okay, so the other thing that's interesting about this solar eclipse chart is that it's very close to the equinox. Yeah, so the equinox is the 22nd, the 23rd September, depending upon whereabouts you are on the planet. And it's literally a few hours after that eclipse. And so not only do we have an eclipse in a crisis degree that is calling the disciples of the world to up their ante and get with the next stage of their work, but there's also this need for being in balance, because it's falling right on the equinox. Now, the equinox is when the days and the nights, the hours are exactly equal. And this is when the sun enters into Libra, the sign of equality and harmony and justice and balance. So it is a period where we say, okay, we're meant to move beyond crisis to some kind of middle ground in terms of compassion, middle ground in terms of wealth, middle ground in terms of the basics of survival. All of those things are the middle ground. And, in ancient times, the Celts and the people from earlier centuries, pre-Christianity, they recognised the cycles of the equinox and the solstices, and they revered them, and they aligned themselves to them through places like this particular beautiful fort, the Grain Fort in Aya. But we seem to be disconnected and have lost our connection to these cycles, and we're on tilt, we're on crisis. And those two eclipses, 2015 and 2025, both say humanity is on the edge of the abyss. It's a crisis. And esoterically, we refer to this as Earth's Great Battle. And it's not just a battle out in the world with warmongers or politicians. It's a battle for, the light and the soul of humanity to rise and to be visible. Just as the blood moon is the energy of the sun trying to pour its way out around the moon. So when we think of darkness, that's a difficult word, I suppose. You could call it a shadow. Darkness is another name for the face of ego. We have the face of evil. We can see it all over the earth at the moment. This is humanity's shadow, my shadow, national shadows, racial shadows. I think in the Bible it's probably referred to as the beast. Theosophically, we might speak about the Lord of Darkness. So this is the blood and the blood moon, the energy of the blood moon, the personality that's dripping and contaminating humanity. So this is what has been rising for healing and redemption over the last decade, very, very strongly since that eclipse in 2015. And the counter to that, of course, is the light of the soul, the forces of light, the mothers of the world, the people who are operating from high principles, right human relations, your soul, the nation's soul, humanity's soul. So this is the battle that's going on. But it's not just the forces of darkness and the forces of light that are involved in this tremendous cleansing that's happening on Earth. It's also the interplanetary host. And to go into that is too complicated a story, but just suffice it to say that what happens on Earth impacts our solar system. And we did see the heart of the galactic center on the ascendant of that chart. So, we might think, okay, well, we kill each other, we wreck the planet. What does it matter to beings beyond our Earth? Well, it matters a great deal. And therefore, we have the interplanetary host, who are the archangelic hosts, they're the intergalactic federation of light, the avatar of synthesis. These are just some of the names of the mighty beings, the last Kumara, whose attention is focused and riveted upon how well humanity is doing in bringing our light forward with less blood, less chaos, less crisis. And of course, we have free will. And because we have free will, we have to play out this drama, and we can't be rescued or saved by any of these interplanetary beings of light, because we are on a journey to go from darkness to greater light, from death, that's the physical world when we live purely in the physical, to the immortality, from the unreal, that's the materialistic world, to the real. This is as Helena Blavatsky gave us this phrase, and that's what's happening. And so if you keep this in mind, that we have this enormous battle that's been going on and has come to a head like a boil that's bursting on that eclipse in 2015, and we are in stage 2 with this eclipse over the next 3 years to see how and in what way we choose light over darkness. with the assistance of the interplanetary beings of light and the angelic host, when we remember to invoke them and call them into action. A momentous time to be living on Earth. Just an example of one facet of evil that I saw this week was this preposterous evil plan that has come out of Jerusalem, come out of Israel, come out of America, the Gaza Riviera plan that once all the Palestinians are exterminated and moved on, then the USA will become the trustee for Palestine for the next decade and transform the region into high-tech mega cities. And all the money, and this is a document called I forget what it was called now. It's been leaked out of the White House about a week ago to CNN, I think, and has gradually come out into the worldwide media. So this plan will be funded by the Saudis, the wealth of the Saudis, and private enterprise. It's the most futuristic, you would say laughable, but evil, because we heard Trump talk about this back in February or March, someone like that. He talked about the Riviera and the opportunities for doing business, but first we need to exterminate people. I mean, this is modern ethnic cleansing, and you would say it's so farcical, and yet it's persisting, and they're leaking this information out. They want to give people $5,000 per person to voluntarily leave. Let's not call it ethnic cleansing. And those that don't leave, they want to give them a token. Well, we'll take your land, but we'll give you a very, very small, minuscule, you couldn't call it an apartment, in a smart city, and we'll basically monitor you inside this digital prison. We'll give you a rent subsidy and food for 1 year, and then you're on your own. I mean, this is the most evil of plans that I don't even really want to think about. What's more important to think about is that we do have a spiritual victory. You know, and there's something, I've written a book called The Children of the New Civilization, talking about the unfolding of consciousness on Earth. And these few words come from that book. And it says, this battle, this is the great battle that we're all witnessing and involved in, has already been won on the spiritual levels of Earth. And the spiritual being, known as victory, is now descending step by step through the astral and the mental worlds to the physical world, continent by continent, race by race, culture by culture, nation by nation. Light will be victorious until eventually, over the next 500 years, humanity's shadow, as well as ancient and cosmic darkness, will withdraw from the earth. So I find that extremely comforting, that to know that on these spiritual, the inner levels, there is already a victory, but it has yet to manifest on all the continents, through all the races, through the cultures, through the nations, and on the physical level. We don't know, is it going to take a decade, a century, 500 years, but eventually the shadow, the darkness, will be forced to withdraw. This is the spiritual reality which will last, whereas those fanciful plans of the Dark Brotherhood, the evil plans, will just fall away. But it won't happen overnight. Yes. And so we need, and that's where Saturn's in Pisces, in that last degree of Pisces, asking us to find deep principles, and it's like we have to grasp the spiritual sword. You know, we can't be a bystander to what's happening on Earth. We need to choose our position and stand there. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about the United Nations. Every year in September, for generally about, what's that? It's like 2 weeks. Yeah, about 2 weeks. In New York, the United Nations meet. So in 2025, it's 80 years since the United Nations was inaugurated. And of course, the number 8 is associated with spiritual and a worldly reality. Yeah, so I imagine the top of the agenda, and I haven't seen, I don't think they put it out for public consumption, what's on the agenda. But I would imagine that the two-state solution in Palestine will be at the top of the agenda. And it has been over the last month that slowly some of the Western European nations and Australia have come out and said, okay, all right, we'll throw our hat in the ring and we will vote for Palestine and two-state solution. Okay, so there's the date that the United Nations the resolution for the two-state solution. The first time it was proposed that the solution to the Middle East would be two states was the 29th of November in 1947. Yeah? And then in 1948, the Genocide Convention came into place. And that's really important because this is an agreement that we will behave as civilized people. And I was reading somewhere in this last week that in the last 80 years, there's been the occasional individual who's been not allowed to attend the United Nations General Assembly. But it's only ever been once in the last 80 years that a nation has been suspended. And that was South Africa during the apartheid era. A good decade or so before the apartheid issue had been on the agenda of the United Nations. And by the time they got to 1974, finally they said, that's it, South Africa's not welcome, they can't come. Yep, okay. And then it took another, 17 years for apartheid to finish in South Africa. So that is the only precedent to a suspension until 2025, where, you know, the American government has simply revoked the visas of the Palestinian delegation who planned on attending this convention in a few weeks' time. And not only the Palestinian delegation, but also any Palestinian are no longer able to come. You know, so this is momentous that here's, I think, what should be at the top of the agenda is for the UN General Assembly to vote for a two-state solution, and yet the people who this is about, the Palestinians, are barred from even entering physically. I believe they're able to come in online. The other thing that's happened, really, when I start to think about this, the UN and the General Assembly, is that Israel's been thumbing its nose at the Genocide Convention ever since it came into place in 1948. It doesn't mind genocide. And not only Israel, of course, America's been up to their eyeballs, and many other, Britain, many other of the deep state agencies around the planet have been actively involved in genocide. And what's happening is that America continues to use its veto in the United Nations General Assembly to protect Israel and to look the other way for genocide. And it's been using its veto and looking the other way around what's happening in Israel since 2023 at the very latest, and at the earliest, basically since 1948. Yeah. So the question that I ask is that can anything be done? There is one precedent. The South Africans have been thrown out. Is it possible that the United Nations General Assembly can literally suspend America, because Israel's not one of the major signatories? It's a member, but not one of the major Security Council. Is it possible to suspend the American government based on their genocide and based on what's going on? I have no idea whether, I mean, technically it can happen because it has happened once before in the last 80 years, but whether the Western European nations would have the courage to do this, to say, well, who's funding this war of genocide? Who's looking the other way? Oh, hang on a minute, it's America. What can we do about it? We'll suspend them. I would hope that there would be the courage for that. It does seem unlikely, but something has to give, because we have world karma being created, enormous karma. What is it they say? That the standard that you walk past is the standard that you accept. And You know, there are many of the European nations that have been calling out enough, enough, enough. There are certain American citizens who are calling out enough, enough. World opinion's starting to turn against America, against Israel. The economic sanctions haven't worked. The trade embargoes haven't been strong enough, although I did see something just today that said that if the flotilla of aid that's going through the Mediterranean is intercepted again, I think there are 40 boats heading towards Palestine to break the siege. I think it's the Spanish, or is it the Italians, who are saying if that flotilla is interrupted, we're going to close down all the ports in Israel, in our country, in the southern Mediterranean to Israel. So the trade embargoes are getting it deeper and deeper and stronger. World opinion is starting to turn because really, I don't think there's any other way of describing Israel than as a rogue nation because of the murder, of the starvation, of the innocent people, the children, the journalists, the doctors, the assassination of the Yemeni prime minister last week. They're clearly a rogue genocidal state hiding behind the skirts of the Americans who are looking the other way in the United Nations General Assembly. Well, this is creating enormous karma. Yes, and karma always has to be paid for at some point somewhere down the track. Meanwhile, Hamas are refusing to give up and continue to defend the homeland of the Palestinians. And the Houthis, despite the assassination of, I think it was 11 or 12 people, including the Prime Minister last week, continue to support the Palestinians, as do ordinary humanity. So it seems that the governments are out of step with ordinary humanity. They're the ones that are holding on to power and money, but the wheel is turning. Yes, and I read somewhere that 2/3 of the United Nations General Assembly need to agree in order to suspend America from the UN. I don't know whether they can get 2/3. Let's see. And of course, many countries have come out and said that if Bibi Netanyahu puts his feet on the soil of certain countries, that he would be arrested for war crimes. It seems very unlikely that President Trump would arrest him. When he comes to America, he seems to operate with impunity. So there's enormous karma being created for the American people, for the Israeli people, because of what's been happened. Yeah. Human values reversed. You know, there's something, when you look at esoteric astrology, there comes a point in evolution where a tipping point leads to a reversal. And that tipping point leading to a reversal where the shadow stops having ascendancy and soul begins to gain ascendancy. This occurs in the sign of Scorpio. So we can see the reversal happening everywhere. Initially, you know, we thought capitalism was a great thing. Everybody gets a job, everybody gets to work, everybody gets to have their home and to profit from the fruit of their endeavors. But it has gone to such an extreme point that we have global greed and global debt. We have the oligarchy, we have the banks, we have the landlord class, we have the homeless people everywhere. So what seemed like really good principles of capitalism and democracy have gone to an extreme and become corrupted. We have the forever wars and the rogue nations. Inevitably, we are going to have a stock market crash. And whether this comes about in 2025 because of something like India's changing sides and moving its economic shift into the BRICS nations, the BRICS nations refusing to trade in the American dollar, how or in what way the currency, the framework, that's the Capricorn energy, collapses, it's imploding. Yes, and when things implode, when you have a collapse, there has to be a collapse before the wheel can be reversed. The ego has to has to collapse before the soul can gain ascendancy. And as I said, it happens in the sign of Scorpio. So every year, late October through to late November, the sun moves through Scorpio. And every year, individually and nationally and collectively, we have an opportunity for a reversal. And what we want is a reversal of values so that the values of the heart overtake the values of greed. We would hope. We have seen just as much of abuse of power and misuse. I think of Tiananmen Square, for instance, back in, 1989? I forget. The misuse is not always and exclusively in the West. It appears that when power is amassed in the hands of a few, it leads to corruption. So we remain to watch and to observe whether the rising nations of China or Russia or India or Africa can hold power and not abandon the heart, not go into greed. Because what we really want, if we had an authentic, and I think you'd say that it would be the Nordic countries that have had strong socialist economies, healthcare for the ordinary people, education for the ordinary people. Some of those principles were there in communism, but whether they came to fruition in a positive way or whether it became corrupted before it all collapsed. We've had the collapse of capitalism, the collapse of communism. The Lord Valcourt predicted this, and he said that out of the collapse of capitalism and communism would come a new middle way. So this is what we hope comes over the next century. And in the new middle way, we would have infrastructure that benefits everybody and services that benefit everybody. We would have equality and the raising of living standards and health for everybody. So that's the goal. But we don't know. It'll take a decade, a century, 5 centuries to get there. But we are clearly in the transition period of the Scorpio death of the old and the rebirth of the new. I've done the chart here for the United Nations are meeting, and they're meeting for a fortnight, and it's on I think it's the last day of the sitting that Trump's coming in to address the United Nations. And I looked at the chart and I was immediately struck by the 4 planets in Libra, which esoterically is associated with justice. And I would hope that we would have justice for the ordinary people in war zones all around the planet, whether it's Palestine, whether it's Ukraine, wherever the wars are, whether it's Sudan, yeah. And the other thing about the sign of Libra is that it governs Asia, yeah. So, I would hope that 2/3 of the delegates in the United Nations General Assembly speak up and vote in favour of the Palestinian 2-state solution and to censure and throw out other nations that are involved in genocide. Yes, what else can I see in this chart? Again, there's a kite. It's the same kite, Pluto and Uranus. This is like the detonation of the old and the emergence of the new, yeah? And I look at that and I say this is the emergence of the Asian century, without any doubt. The other thing that I noticed was that the 23rd of September is a holiday in the Jewish calendar, and it's referred to as Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. And I was listening to a talk about that, and they talked about this being a very contemplative day for people of the Jewish faith to tune into the cry of the soul and to proclaim God as the highest authority, the King. I thought, well, isn't that a powerful day? Because we have the cry of humanity very, very loud, and we have materialism and power and wealth and corruption posing as the king. So I'm hoping that the voice of humanity is heard through the United Nations. I'm not sure that would be heard through Trump, but heard through the United Nations as a body. And if not, then we'd have to say, is the United Nations worthy of continuing? Is it useful to continue in the high ideals in which it was inaugurated? The other thing in this chart that I noticed was the Mars-Pluto square. That's the battle to death. You know, this is two of the non-sacred planets in a less than 1 degree square. This is like a fight to the death when no one will give up. So, you know, does that typify Trump's approach and his speech? And does the other beautiful things in the chart typify the courage of the voice of humanity coming out of the United Nations? We will have to wait and see. I think that's all I'll say about that. And I'll just talk a little bit about the, you know, that eclipse from 2015, where the eclipse, the solar eclipse, that total solar eclipse was in the last degree of Pisces. And to me, that indicates, you know, the end of the epoch, not only of the age of Pisces, but also of the great year. Astrologically, we have cycles. So each zodiacal year is 2,160 Earth years. But when you have 12 zodiacal years, that's referred to as a great year, and it's almost 26,000 years. And esoterically, not only are we leaving Pisces and going into Aquarius, Aquarius is also the beginning of the next great year. So we're at the end of a 2,160 year cycle and at the end of almost a 26,000 year cycle. A momentous period. One of the tenets of Hermeticism and Theosophy and occultism is as above, so below. So if you look at, and I talked before about the sign of Scorpio and how important it is in the reversal of consciousness, where the ego's light is overtaken, not completely, but significantly, to the point that the first initiation is taken. And that always happens in the sign of Scorpio, which is just one of the signs of the zodiac. And, you know, there's something about this movement through the seasons of our evolution. We have been the fifth root race, where we've primarily thought that the mind was the highest, the intellect was the highest, whereas we're moving and transitioning to the sixth root race, where the intuition and the connection between the heart and the higher mind is what we will be developing astrologically. So this here, I've put away the little thing again. Over here is the sign of Aquarius that we're entering into, and there's the sign of Pisces that we are leaving behind. In the Indian tradition, one of the most ancient of the traditions on earth, they speak about the yugas and the cycle of the yugas. It's not an astrological way of looking at it, and yet it fits very, very, very well with the astrological view of things. So, for instance, in this way of looking at, we'd say we are currently in the Kali Yuga, which was known as the age of materialism or the age of ignorance. Yeah. And then the next age is the Dwapara Yuga, the age of energy or technology. There it is there. So the Dwapara is there. So we are shifting into technology, and we think, you know, well, we think we know something about computers and AI and technology, but from a cosmic level, we're just at the infancy of technology, the infancy of space travel or time travel or telepathy, or beginning to understand the broader, deeper dimensions of energy. This is where we are transitioning through to. Eventually, we will get into the Treta Yuga, where telepathy will be, and you can see this is 4000 AD. Yeah, so this is a long way away. We're down here. We're down here in the very early stages of having left the Kali Yuga and into the Dwapara Yuga, the technology age, which goes through till 4000 AD. Eventually, we will get to the Satya Yuga, the age of spirit, yeah, and we will be know that we are our immortal selves. We will be living in compassion. The divine will be within. This is a long way down the track. So evolution is slow and painstaking. I thought I'd talk just a little bit about the rays of the nations. The rays of the nations is a topic that the Lord Dwell-Cool's written about 100 years ago, and Philip Lindsay's upgraded this information in the last 20 odd years, I think. And it's a way of understanding the different nations on Earth and which of the frequencies of light they relate to. It's a big subject, and I'm just going to throw in a few of them here. So what we have as the Piscean age finishes is the outgoing sixth ray. Yeah. So there's something about America, Spain, and Italy that all have strong sixth ray that needs to be completely transformed. The personality of America and its involvement in NATO and the UN and Gaza and all of that, the fanatical side of the sixth ray is leaving. You can't work that way anymore. Whereas Spain and Italy, the soul energy is in the sixth ray. So you know, Spain has had its empire, and it's no longer a big world player, but neither is Italy. There's something about the USA, Spain, and Italy that has to leave behind aspects of the fanatical. We are going through the end times, and the end times, this transition between the ages, is governed by the first ray. So therefore, any of the nations that have the first ray strong are there where the detonation's occurring. Well, that's Britain, yeah, which was once a mighty empire. Something about the personality of the British and their involvement in NATO and the Middle East and the United Nations is going through fairly dramatic transformation. India and China and Brazil all have their soul in the first ray, and they are all involved in the BRICS. Yeah, the new emerging, what's referred to often as the global south. Yeah, the nations who, this is their century, India, China, Brazil, and their soul light is rising once the energy of Britain has collapsed. Yes, the rays cycle in and out. There are 7 visible and 3 invisible. We have the incoming fourth ray, which is creating a lot of chaos and confusion that will lead us ultimately to balance. And the nations that are intrinsically at the forefront of this finding balance are India, Germany, and Italy. Germany especially, because Germany's soul ruler is the fourth ray. Yeah. So let's wait and see whether Germany can come to the foreground in terms of the heart and balance. Yeah. There's something about India on its personality level. You know, India was a mighty, mighty, mighty civilization long before the birth of Christ. Yeah. And is coming again into its own. And Italy has its personality there. The other ray that I thought I'd talk about, where it is the seventh ray, the incoming seventh ray. And the incoming seventh ray to do with ceremonial order and magic and the restructuring of the new world order. Well, there's the soul of Russia. So let's not for 1 minute forget that Russia has the seventh ray soul, and it is stepping forward and taking its place in this century. And also Spain's come up a few times. So some restructuring of the Spanish personality and soul is there as well. It's a fantastic, very interesting subject, the rays of the nations. I've been talking and talking, and I'm just going to wind up now. We are in a period of revelations, new revelations. If you look to the Bible and the book of Revelations 22:13, you'll find the words, I am the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. Now, when I read that, I think, I'm an astrologer, I think astrologically in terms of Aries and Pisces, and we have the beginning and we have an end, but I also think of how the circle becomes a spiral. So I think that the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last, refers to consciousness raising. But as I said, we can't raise consciousness unless we reverse our orientation and put the soul in the driver's seat. And that happens every year. We have an opportunity to reverse orientation. And I hope humanity chooses this opportunity during October, November this year to place human values, to choose human values to the forefront of material values. Because this is the way that we have a birth. Instead of an end times, we can have a birth of the Christ consciousness in the cave of the heart. And a few words here from the lady Ananda Tarashan. And she says, and she was a mystic and a prophet for this age. And she wrote these words. She says, and the Lord Maitreya, otherwise known as the Christ or the fifth and the future Buddha of Earth, sang his special song, "Come to me, sit at my feet and see the universe through my eyes and know the solar logos through my heart. For 2,000 years I have observed humanity, and my messengers have tried to reveal the true Christ nature. Now I reveal myself as the risen one, the new Lord of Earth, and the power, the love, and the light of the solar logos for this solar system. Through my present vehicle, I shall give a new dispensation for my children of the heart, and a new revelation shall open your minds to the true teaching of the God you know as the solar logos." Our Father in heaven. It's taken from Ananda's book written in 1993, Living Word of the Hierarchy. And so we know that we are in a process of rebirth and revelation and end times. I'm just going to complete this talk with these words from a song that I wrote a few years ago. I just pulled a couple of paragraphs out, and I entitled the song "Till Stars Burn Bright." This is a message from the heart of all love. It says, "You have my love, my peace and healing, until the end of time comes stealing. We hold your hearts in love's safekeeping, till stars burn bright 'neath heaven's weeping. Till stars burn bright and heavens fall, my peace unending surrounds you all. Till stars burn bright 'neath heaven's weeping, we hold your hearts in love's safekeeping." And so while we go through these most momentous changes on earth, we must remember this, that we are held in the heart of all love. And there are a few of the links to the various references from this talk. And so completes this talk for this evening. Thank you.